Hey folks, welcome back and thank you for joining me. If you watched my last crafting video, then you saw me make a wizard's tower out of a $5 birdhouse from the dollar store. In that video I mentioned a few other ideas that you might be able to make with those birdhouses, and some of you responded to those ideas, so today I'm going to give one of them a shot. Today I'm making guard towers. Now, these are from the same line of birdhouses. They're a little bit different in shape and style, but that's alright. They're going to work perfectly for what I've got in mind. Now, I don't have any guard towers. Okay, I've got kind of like a broken guard tower that works fine for ruins and things like that, but you can't really throw it down in a town or use it as part of a keep and expect it to look good. So I'm going to fix that today. What I'm hoping to do is divide this video, or this project rather, into two videos. One being building the guard towers themselves, and the other being modular pieces that you can put in between the guard towers to make up either castle walls or gatehouses. That will come a little bit later on. For today though, building and painting the two guard towers is going to be a pretty big project on its own. So let's just jump into it and get started. To follow through on my plan for these birdhouses, I'm going to need the tops to be flat. That meant taking a saw and getting rid of the pieces on top, leaving just the bottom layer of that central piece. That's because I want a big, boxy top on these towers, and I'm going to use actual gift boxes to give myself that structure. It did take a little time to saw through and file the pieces because the wood is cheap and will break if you're not careful. It is definitely not because of a lack of experience with power tools. That is a vicious rumor, and I'll have no part of it. Did they buy that? Okay, you goof. Seriously though, the boxes just get glued on top with tacky glue. They're going to get covered in layers of foam, and they're really just a base to work off of, so don't worry too much about this part. I did a few tests with different foam methods, trying to reduce both cost and the time this project was going to take, but at the end of the day, I simply wasn't getting the look I wanted from any of the cheap, easy methods like the foam roller or drawing in stones and using tinfoil. It just wasn't giving me the height and variation I wanted, and that left me with just one option that I was kind of dreading. It was time to get out the hot wire and make some foam bricks. And by some foam bricks, I mean like 1,000 or more between the two guard towers. I'm sure you're probably all familiar with how to do this, but just in case, I took old scrap pieces of foam and cut them down into thin strips. The strips get stacked on top of each other, 4 to go, and cut into bricks. This is the first batch of bricks out of 3 for the project. The bricks go into an old container along with some rocks, bark, and pebbles. And the whole thing gets shaken up. That's going to texture the bricks. Makes them nice and uneven and rounds off a bunch of their sharpest corners. That leaves you with something that looks a little bit like this. As you can see, there's a pretty notable difference between the tumbled bricks and the freshly cut ones. And what are you going to do with hundreds of bricks if not glue on hundreds of bricks? I use tacky glue and a wet brush and just start placing bricks down. You're going to want to put on a podcast or watch a movie or do something, anything else during this process. Later on in the build, I do give up on the brush and end up just using a ton of tacky glue in lines to put this on. The reason that tacky glue is the right choice here is that it starts to firm and grab the bricks as soon as you place them, but not so much that you don't have working time. Using hot glue on this scale would be a mess, and straight PVA would just take too long to tack up and grab. You want to make sure to stagger your brick placements as you go, and you can even cut and add smaller bricks to fit or wherever you think they'll look good. If you've been around hobby YouTube long, you've seen at least one crafter say that this is their favorite part of a project, placing bricks. They get a kind of zen from it and just zone out and build. I'm not that guy. I hate this part. It's boring, it takes forever, and it's a lot of work. But it looks great, and that's okay. You don't ever need to feel bad or lesser if you don't like the same parts of the hobby as your favorite hobby tubers. Enjoy the parts you enjoy. That's part of what makes your builds into your individual style and what you as a crafter bring to the table. Also literally what you're going to end up bringing to the table, but you know what I mean. You're not lesser or a worse crafter just because a bunch of YouTubers say placing 10,000 bricks is their happy place, and for you it's 10,000 hours of pink foam hell. I think new crafters sometimes get focused too much on what they're told they should like instead of just enjoying the hobby. So try to do that. The hole in the birdhouse just gets covered up with construction paper. I know, not very strong, right? Trust me, by the time you put bricks over it and Mod Podge and everything else, it's fine. You just need enough of a surface here to brick over. Which is what comes next, by the way. More bricks. But eventually, I end up with this. I brought the bricks up to where they meet the bottom of the gift box, since that's going to be where timbers take over, and then I can finally call it a day. No more bricks. Hallelujah. No more bricks. Not bad. Not bad. That's only took a few hours. No big deal. Right. Okay. Alright, these are ready for the next step. This has been so many little pink bricks, but God, this actually might be the most individual bricks I've ever laid for one project like this. It was just unending, but it's fine, I like how it looks. So we're moving on. The next step is going to be just covering up the remaining wooden parts on the bases here, and then can move on to working on these, which is going to be done with pink foam, just pink foam. So yeah, shouldn't do that. All right, don't know why I did that. Moving on. You heard the man. From foam bricks onto a slightly different foam bricks. I cover the top layer of the base in standard bricks just to match everything else. Then to cover the edge of the base, I actually take a thin strip of pink foam and hot glue it around. Once it's in place and dry, it's easy enough to mark off some brick lines with a knife and then just use a ballpoint pen to draw in some cracks and details. I wanted this to look like the heavier foundation stones that the tower was built on, and it provides a little visual variety too, which is important when the entire build is wood and stone. And while I do that important work, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters, starting especially with my newest supporter, Jason Ashton. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate you showing your support to the channel. This time I'd also like to shout out Amanda Chisholm for supporting at the terrain tier, and Jessica Holden for bumping her membership up to the monster tier. Absolutely incredible. Thank you all so much for your support. Since the last video, the channel has also received several very kind, generous donations, so I'd like to thank all of those supporters as well. You folks are amazing, and it helps the channel more than I can say. Once all of that is done on both towers, it's time to add more texture. This is the same method as always, a rolled up tinfoil ball that just gets rolled over the entire structure. I already have some texture from tumbling the bricks earlier, but I want to layer that to get deeper, more interesting results. You can also use this chance to push a little harder on some bricks and kind of deform them, make them look older, worn, or chipped. That's going to really amplify how it looks as a finished product. The timber pieces are next. These are made from the same pink foam strips that the bricks were. Instead of cutting and tumbling them though, I use the strips as they are and texture them with a brass wire brush. This is a great technique for making old timbers that anyone can do, and these brushes are easily picked up on the cheap at most dollar stores. That's where I got mine, and they have lasted forever. I start this part by building out the supports on the bottom of the tower because that's the trickiest part. Unfortunately, it's also really tricky to record because of the angle. I ended up using a mix of hot glue and tacky glue to get them to stick together, and yes, it's a bit finicky and one of the longer parts of an already long build, but then you can just start slapping down timbers. The easiest way to do this, after some experimenting, was to texture a bunch of the planks at once and then use a combination of glues. Hot glue at the edges since I needed those to stick immediately, and tacky glue in the middle for long-term durability. Like with the bricks earlier, you want to stagger the line patterns on your planks. That will make it look more realistic and just, well, cooler. I also used a pen to just pop a few nail holes into each plank right around the joints, 2 on either side. It's quick to do and again adds to the appearance. Now if you're wondering about the corners where the planks meet and on top and bottom, I'm just leaving them raw for now. That's going to get covered up in a future step, so for now, don't sweat it. At this stage, the project looks like this. It's been a long time coming, but I feel like I can finally see where it's going, and the most basic structural elements are done. I know that I want to add some arrow slits to the top parts of the towers. Realistically, you wouldn't really see these from the outside, but this is fantasy, not history, and not only do you sometimes have to just go with what looks cool, but real medieval crossbowmen didn't have to deal with orcs, or fireballs, or dragons, so our fantasy crossbowmen have a good excuse for reinforcing these. I want these protective arrow slit plates to be stone, so I just textured them the exact same way as I did all of the bricks. A rolled up tinfoil ball will do the trick. I use a pencil to press the arrow slit into the foam, and that's about it for this step. I'll come back to these a little later to add more to them, but for now, that's where I leave them. Now it's time to start adding some details and covering up all those rough edges. I start by cutting out some strips of construction paper. I used 1/4-inch strips, but your measurement is going to depend on your own build. These are going to be glued around all of the edges of the guard tower box. If you've left them really ragged, you can trim them down a bit first, but there's no need to be too precious here. I want the guard towers to look weathered and old anyway, and the construction paper will fold right over any ragged edges. I also use these as girding for the arrow slits we've already made, which just get attached with tacky glue. That leaves them looking like this. Getting there. I'm going to be using 3D printed doors for this. These were a free file, which will be linked below. To place the doors, I simply center them on the one side of the tower and trace the outline with a pen. That outline gets cut with a sharp knife, and all of the center bricks, they can just be pulled out. That way the door is inset into the wall itself, helping it to blend in. Always dry fit pieces like this before gluing them. Make sure it fits how and where you want and looks how you expect before gluing it into place. And finally, I take some of the leftover bricks and just build a simple set of steps up to the door. Now it's finally time for my favorite part, getting some Mod Podge and black paint onto these beasts. The part where you cover up all the strange materials in bright colors and turn it into one cohesive object instead. I love it. This is the bit where you finally get to see if it's going to turn out how you imagined. I should say right now that getting the black paint into all of those cracks and crevices was tricky though. If you're going to do a build like this, I'd strongly recommend painting the birdhouses black before you begin so that you don't have to worry about any of that natural wood color showing through. Just a tip so that you can do this a little faster and better than I did. When it's completely coated, here's what we end up with. Now the painting. This is the fun part, the zen part for me. Not all those silly bricks. You want to let the black paint and Mod Podge dry completely before starting. If you're not sure, you can always just leave it overnight. For the stone, I'm actually going to go with a gray this time, something I haven't done much lately. But I want these to fit a more classic, kitchen sink kind of fantasy vibe. I start with a dark gray over the black in an all-over base coat. All of the paints I'm using for this project are folk art craft paints. They're inexpensive, and for the most part, very effective. There is one exception, but we'll cover that when we get there. While I'm waiting for that to dry, the timbers get their first coat with burnt umber. This is a dark, rich brown that makes a great shadow color and is a solid way to step up from that pure black. Overbrushing and dry brushing are going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting for me on this one. That was the point of making sure to give everything so much texture. Now that we did that work to set it up, it's incredibly quick to come in and overbrush on a lighter gray and start to see those textures really pop. Before the final dry brush on the stone though, I want to bring in a nice brown color and pick out a few bricks in it. This is just an extra step, it's not even really necessary, but it's quick and easy, and it makes the final product look better. So why not? While those dry, I overbrush a light warm beige over all of the wood pieces. This does the same thing here, brings out all of the textures and shifts the color up toward where I want it to land in the end. I take the chance now to fill the doors in a dark blue. I do use miniature paint for this just to keep it fast. The metallics, both those on the door and the tower, are going to be the last thing we base coat. That way our dry brush won't affect them. And finally, everything on the pieces catches one final, much lighter dry brush of off-white. I think this particular color was called linen, if that matters, but any warm-leaning off-white will do the trick just fine. You want to catch the stone, the wood, and the doors with this. It may look bright at first, but we're going to knock that down a little very shortly. But first we have to move on to the metallics, and this is the exception I mentioned earlier. Metallic craft paints generally are not great. I did use them here just to show it can be done, but I very much recommend using miniature paints if you have that luxury. Metallic craft paints will require multiple coats to get good coverage, and that really is going to prolong your painting process in ways you probably don't want. Either way, you want to hit the metal reinforcements on the guard towers and on the arrow slits, as well as the metal banding on the doors. Once the metal is dry, I dry brush on a bit of orange and brown at the edges to function as rust. Again, it looks bright right now, but it's gonna get knocked down in just a second, since it's time for some fun with washes. I wanted to use an oil wash on this, but I wasn't totally sure about a reaction with the foam, so I tested a piece first and just dipped some foam in white spirits to see what would happen. It was fine, by the way, so oil wash it is. This is a mix of black and brown oil paints meant to give some nice, dark, dirty shadows to everything. And once again, I hit the entire build with it. Just be conscious as you go that if you see it pooling anywhere that you don't want it to, you can bring your brush back across it to spread it out. Now you could of course use a standard homemade craft wash for this. That's water, paint or ink, and dish soap for those who don't know. But because the metal girding was made of construction paper, I was worried about that much water reactivating the glue. That's why I wanted to just avoid that completely if I could, and stick with an oil wash. Now this is going to take a little while to dry, and you want to let that happen completely before this step. But when it has, I come back in with a green wash, just a standard craft wash this time, and use it around the bottom of each building to give it a more mossy, organic feel. I also splodge the green wash onto other random spots on the wood, as if it's been built a long time ago and plant life and decay have started to take hold. Then it's just the last few details. I work some pigment powder into the recesses at the bottom and around the steps. I chose a nice orange-brown to contrast with that algae green of the wash I just used. The arrow slits get darkened with some watered-down black paint to give the illusion of depth. And I also make up a mix of about 50-50 green flock and PVA as moss. This gets spread on the wood and pressed into the cracks of the bricks in some places, largely just using my fingers. I know, you can use a wooden craft stick, but whatever. It's easier and works better to fan it out with your fingertips. I also make sure to press this more thickly into any areas where the wooden planks don't quite fit together flush, which is somewhere that moss and plant life would be sure to bloom. And it's that final detail that at long last brings me to 2 finished guard towers. I won't lie folks, this one took a heck of a lot longer than I anticipated. So many bricks. But I do really like how it turned out, and it just wouldn't have been the same using the other methods. Now if you liked this video, if you like this project, please let me know in the comments, hit like and subscribe, all of that good stuff. The plan, if the video does well, is to come back in the future and to build an optional modular wall segment that can function as a gatehouse or a keep wall. So I need to know if you're all interested in seeing that. If you want to support the channel, then one of the best ways to do that is subscribing or sharing this with your friends or groups that you think might dig it. If you'd like to do more though, you can join my Patreon supporters or donate to the channel in a few other ways from the links below. Thank you all for watching. An extra thank you to my supporters and donators, and I'll see you on the next one.